Hello, everyone. I'm Zhang Tianyang. Today, there are three news stories about Taiwan. The first news is that U.S. President Trump officially signed the Taiwan Assurance Implementation Act on Monday. This act is widely seen as a major diplomatic win for Taiwan. More importantly, it provides a legal basis for the U.S. to lift its self-imposed restrictions on interactions with Taiwan in the future, allowing Taiwan's high-level officials to resume visits to the U.S. and making exchanges between the two sides more like those between countries. Taiwan's Foreign Minister Lin Chialong said that based on recent communications with Washington, Taiwan is confident that the Trump administration will allow Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te to transit through the U.S. when visiting Latin American allies. Japan's Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi, on the morning of Year-Month Day, during a full session of the Senate, said this in response to a senator's question. Japan's stance on Taiwan is completely consistent with the relevant provisions of the 1972 Japan-China Joint Declaration, and there has been no change. Takaichi's full response, based on congressional records and media reports, was, "Our government, that is, the Japanese government, has a basic stance on Taiwan that is consistent with the 1972 Japan-China Joint Declaration, and this stance has not changed at all." Her statement immediately sparked enthusiastic responses from Little Pinks, because they think it's a sign of Takaichi backing down or a symbol of that. But actually, the 1972 China-Japan Joint Declaration is not the same as how the Little Pinks interpret it. We'll talk about the exact content in a bit. Also, from Takaichi's statement, I want to mention Ayumi Hamasaki. After her scheduled performance in Shanghai was forcibly canceled by the CCP, she decided to perform alone in front of 14,000 empty seats in the empty theater, completing the show as planned, just like a normal concert. This solo performance made the CCP extremely embarrassed. In a bit, we'll discuss how this concert was actually a PR disaster for the CCP. The second topic we're discussing today is that every year around mid-December, the CCP holds the Central Economic Work Conference. The main purpose of this meeting is to set the tone for next year's economy, including GDP growth rate, which will then be submitted to the National People's Congress for review the following year. China's current economic situation is extremely bad, but the CCP has found a killer move to deal with it. We'll get into the details in a bit. The third topic is about whether Venezuela will face U.S. military strikes. Trump today almost directly said that ground operations are about to start. If you think these topics are important, please like, subscribe, and hit the little bell. Let's start with the first topic now. Trump signed the Taiwan Assurance Implementation Act yesterday. The purpose of this act is to strengthen the U.S. State Department's oversight and updates of guidelines for US-Taiwan relations, ensuring that the unofficial relationship between the U.S. and Taiwan can continue to develop under the One China policy framework. The act requires the U.S. State Department to conduct a full review and update of internal guidelines for U.S.-Taiwan relations every 2 years. Other federal agencies, like the Department of Defense and Commerce, must follow the State Department's guidelines when interacting with Taiwanese officials and submit reports to Congress. On the surface, this act doesn't seem special. We just read those things, and you might not react right away. Simply put, in past U.S.-Taiwan interactions, the U.S. had many self-imposed limits. These restrictions weren't required by law, but were unilateral administrative decisions by the government. For example, the U.S. government bans the President, Vice President, Secretary of State, and other cabinet-level members from visiting Taiwan. It also restricts Taiwan's President, Vice President, or ministerial-level officials from visiting the U.S., bans active-duty Taiwanese military from visiting the U.S., and prohibits U.S. ambassadors and envoys from inviting Taiwanese officials into embassies. These restrictions have been in place since U.S.-China normalization in 1979, lasting about years, and only started easing gradually from Trump's first term. In year, the U.S. passed the Taiwan Travel Act, encouraging high-level mutual visits between Taiwan and the U.S. Then in year, it passed the Taiwan Assurance Act, which first required a review of the U.S. executive branch's self-imposed limits. In year, then Secretary of State Pompeo announced the cancellation of all self-restrictions, meaning US-Taiwan exchanges would no longer have any administrative regulatory limits, and past State Department guidelines were all invalidated. This was announced a few days before Trump left office on Monday. Now in year, the Taiwan Assurance Implementation Act requires reviews every 2 years, focusing on identifying which restrictions can be lifted and incorporating Congress's views. For example, Congress recognizes Taiwan as a freely elected government, so the executive branch must make corresponding adjustments. So you can see that these bills and executive orders easing restrictions on Taiwan all happened during Trump's terms. One in his first term, one in his second, with Biden's 4 years in between doing almost no adjustments. Why did this suddenly get attention? Because in August this year, there was a globally watched event. Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te was preparing to visit Paraguay, Guatemala, and Belize, all Latin American countries. Traditionally, his plane could stop in the U.S. for transit, whether in San Francisco or New York. But in August, when Lai was preparing to visit Latin American allies, the U.S. rejected his transit request. Insiders said Trump at the time was worried that Lai's transit might affect trade negotiations with the CCP and the Trump-Xi summit. Since Lai couldn't transit in the U.S. for refueling or whatever, he canceled the trip. Now the situation has changed. After Trump just signed the Taiwan Assurance Implementation Act, Taiwan's Foreign Minister Lin Chialong said in a Bloomberg interview on Monday, "We think transiting through the U.S. won't be a problem anymore. Based on our current communications, we're confident we can transit via the U.S. to visit Latin American countries soon. We know the Taiwan issue has always been the CCP's most sensitive topic." Japan's Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi said in month that Taiwan trouble is Japan trouble, which the CCP still holds a grudge over and has been waiting to retaliate. The CCP has kept demanding Takaichi retract her words, but she insists there's nothing to change and her statement is fine. During a full Senate session in Japan, Takaichi made this explanation in response to a senator's inquiry. The Japanese government's basic stance on the Taiwan issue is consistent with the 1972 Japan-China Joint Declaration, and this stance has not changed. In other words, Japan's current stance on Taiwan is the same as before, whether under Prime Minister Ishiba or even earlier ones like Nakasone, or even further back after normalization. The policy toward Taiwan hasn't changed. After media reports of this statement, the Little Pinks got excited and immediately interpreted it as Takaichi backing down. Now the question is, what exactly is the Japan-China Joint Declaration's positioning on Taiwan? Okay, let's go back and continue. What is the full stance of the 1972 Japan-China Joint Declaration on the Taiwan issue? According to the declaration, the CCP side's text says, "The government of the People's Republic of China reaffirms that Taiwan is an inalienable part of the People's Republic of China. The government of Japan fully understands and respects this stance, and insists on following the provisions of Article 8 of the Potsdam Proclamation, and Japan recognizes that the CCP is the sole legitimate government of China." This actually mentions 3 issues. First, what is Japan's stance on Taiwan? It's that you think Taiwan is part of you. We fully understand and respect this stance. Meaning, this is your opinion, we get it and respect it, but that doesn't mean we approve or agree that Taiwan is an inalienable part of China. We just know about it. Second part, insist on following Article 8 of the Potsdam Proclamation. What does Article 8 say? Japanese sovereignty should be limited to Honshu, Hokkaido, Kyushu, Shikoku, and such minor islands as we determine. In other words, beside Japan's 4 main islands, there are some attached small islands, like the Senkaku Islands, which are near Taiwan in the Ryukyu area. These belong to Japan. So Japan's sovereignty is limited to these islands, and of course that doesn't include Taiwan. Japan's interpretation of Article 8 of the Potsdam Proclamation is that Taiwan's affiliation should be resolved by the San Francisco Treaty. It's not Japanese territory. As for who it goes to, Japan just says we've given up ownership of Taiwan, but who it returns to isn't for Japan to decide. That's the content of the second point. As for Japan recognizing the CCP government as China's sole legitimate government, but what does China refer to here? Of course, it means the People's Republic of China government is the sole legitimate government of the People's Republic of China. Does that mean the PRC government is also the sole legitimate government of the Republic of China? Japan didn't say that. So actually, the 1972 Japan-China Joint Declaration is the same as the US-China Joint Communique. The US just says you think Taiwan is part of China. We know, but we don't necessarily agree. That's the meaning. So in the future, when you see the CCP promoting US-China or Japan-China joint declarations, understand this. Don't expect Japan to recognize Taiwan as Chinese territory or the US to do so. They've never admitted it in any past statements. Takaichi's response to the Senate inquiry didn't admit at all that Taiwan is part of China. Takaichi is Japan's first female prime minister, but I think in this wrestling match with the CCP, she's shown an Iron Lady style, never backing down from her position, stating it very clearly, and not yielding to CCP pressure at all. From this Iron Lady Takaichi, let's talk about another Japanese singer, Ayumi Hamasaki. On Monday, she was scheduled to hold the final show of her Asia tour at Shanghai's Oriental Sports Center as the closing act. For this final Asia tour show, 14,000 tickets were sold, and fans from China, Japan, and many other countries are going to watch. But after the stage was set up, the organizer suddenly announced the cancellation due to force majeure, sparking controversy in China-Japan cultural exchanges. Hamasaki then led her team to complete a no-audience concert in the empty venue, or a one-person concert, and recorded the whole thing, sharing it with fans. Hamasaki wore gorgeous performance outfits, fully dressed up with makeup just like a normal show, leading about 100 dancers and musicians from the Japanese side. She sang from the opening song all the way to encore. Encore means adding more songs and performances. The whole thing lasted 2 to 3 hours, executed as planned, including dazzling lights, booming sound, flying confetti, and multiple costume changes. So this was definitely not a simple rehearsal. It was a real performance. At the time, Hamasaki looked around the empty audience seats, repeatedly shouting, "Shanghai, Shanghai," keeping her usual smile, interacting with the void as if fans were there. Her longtime collaborator, makeup artist Yuki Takano, said Hamasaki shouted "Shanghai" over and over with her usual smile. This was a legendary concert that will be passed down to future generations. The whole process was video recorded and many photos were taken. Afterward, Hamasaki shared on Facebook and Instagram what she wrote. Although there were 14,000 empty seats, I felt the fans' love. This performance was the most unforgettable dance. Thanks to the Chinese and Japanese staff for making the stage happen. In other words, she didn't say my rehearsal was successful. She said this was my performance facing 14,000 empty seats. It was very unforgettable, and she thanked the team. But after this happened, it made the CCP very embarrassed. To save face, the CCP official side issued a so-called debunking statement. On Monday, the paper published it, saying a camera crew member named Lai Tsung-lung issued an apology. On Monday, he secretly photographed rehearsal photos, uploaded to Douyin, and captioned it as Hamasaki recording a concert alone, then self-media fabricated it as a full empty field solo sing, claiming the info was false and troubled the organizer. Actually, you can't imagine, if it was just a rehearsal, why shout encore? Rehearsals usually don't have encores, and the makeup, outfits, stage effects were exactly like a normal performance. So many netizens mocked this debunking as self-deception, calling a deer a horse. Plus, who shouts Shanghai, Shanghai repeatedly during a rehearsal? That's a way to interact with fans, interacting across empty space with them. I think Hamasaki's approach shows a contract spirit. I promise to perform, so even if you don't come, I'll still do it. On one hand, it shows her respect for the contract, and on the other, her apology to fans. It's not my fault, I wanted to perform, but sadly you couldn't get in. So her insistence on contract spirit clearly slapped the CCP in the face. CCP, you have power, you can block fans from entering, but you can't cut the connection between me and fans, our interactions, their love for me, and my respect for them. For the CCP, as the world's second largest economy, using national power to bully a weak woman is itself a PR disaster. I believe the CCP feels very embarrassed, so they responded low-key and shifted blame to the organizer to save some face. But we clearly know the face is already damaged, too late to powder it up. So in this matchup with the CCP, Hamasaki won completely. She'll gain more respect and fan love, while the CCP lost totally, losing both face and substance. The CCP even offered some compensation to the organizer because setting up the stage and hiring staff costs money, right? How to settle those costs? You forced me to breach the contract, so the CCP might have to compensate the organizer a bit. So the CCP lost face and substance entirely. Next, I want to say a few words about China's economy. We know every year around mid-December, the Central Economic Work Conference is held. It usually follows right after the annual Politburo meeting analyzing economic work. So in December, the Politburo probably meets twice. One for economic work, another for year-end summary, like a democratic life meeting, promoting criticism and self-criticism, gathering to chat at year-end. So 2 Politburo meetings in December. Usually at the beginning of the month, they hold the economic research meeting. After that ends, they immediately hold the Central Economic Work Conference, which is larger scale, of course including the State Council, plus NDRC and other ministries, people to meet together. The specific time is usually December, days lasting 2 to 3 days. Then after it closes, the next day or a day later, Xinhua releases the communique, mainly setting the overall tone and main tasks for next year's economic work. China's economy now is like ice and fire. In AI, the CCP is investing at all costs, even poaching people with high salaries, desperately building AI infrastructure, spending tons of money. But in other areas, almost all industries are withering. This economic situation is mainly because many people have blown up. Like due to real estate downturn, their unpaid mortgages might be higher than the house price itself, underwater, totally insolvent. So people don't dare spend money anymore. And without spending, China's economy gets very depressed. You don't buy stuff, others don't produce, and China has serious overproduction now. About when real estate will bottom out, that's probably when China's economy starts rebounding. Everyone's watching when real estate hits bottom, which depends on data. In China, there are 2 private real estate data providers, CRIC and China Index Academy. Normally, these 2 release national top 100 developers' sales totals at the end of each month. So you can see the sales data for the top 100, with the top 10 or so taking the biggest share. But on Monday, the data didn't come out on time. Bloomberg cited anonymous insiders saying they didn't release it because they got a notice from China's Ministry of Housing and Urban-Rural Development to pause public release of such data until further notice. Of course, they're still compiling the data. If you want to see it, only paying clients can, like paying financial institutions can get it, but you have to keep it secret. As of Monday month day, the CCP's housing ministry hasn't responded to Reuters on this. So you can see China's way to deal with economic troubles is to cover it up, just like not releasing youth unemployment rates before. I saw online some saying attributed to Wang Shaw, but I think it's probably fake, just netizens creating jokes. Basically, in the past, CCP treated headaches by curing the head, footaches by curing the foot, but now whether head or foot hurts, they make you mouthless so you can't yell pain like nothing hurts. Of course, if you hide the data, when the CCP makes decisions, they don't know the real situation. Governments make decisions based on data, like the US Fed deciding on rate cuts looks at unemployment, CPI, etc. Without data, any decision is just shooting in the dark, no basis. The CCP now seals the data, so since data shows no problem, or there's no data, they think there's really no problem. This is actually very bad for China's economic recovery. Finally, a few words on the U.S. about to go to war with Venezuela. We know Venezuela's President Maduro is accused by the U.S. of being the head of a drug terror network, causing the U.S. drug crisis. From mid-October, the Trump administration started deploying large-scale forces in the Caribbean, including the world's largest carrier, the Ford, and airstriking suspected drug boats, sinking several. At a press conference, Trump said, "Now, due to the U.S. military's very firm actions, drugs imported from Central and South America to the U.S. have dropped, a huge success, including many illegal immigrants who used to sneak across the southern border. Now, basically gone." So the Trump administration's strikes on drug cartels are very harsh, thunderous methods, and restrictions on illegal immigrants are very strict. Trump said the current situation has cut drug supply by percent, but it's still not enough. So Trump might really have military conflict with Maduro. Actually, as early as Thanksgiving, in a video call with troops, Trump mentioned, "Very soon, we'll start actions on land targets in Venezuela to strike drug networks." This was the first hint of shifting from sea strikes on drug boats to ground strikes on drug groups during Thanksgiving. As of today, Venezuela has allowed U.S. deportation flights to resume sending back to Venezuela Venezuelan illegal immigrants, allowing the U.S. to fly them back, seen as limited cooperation with the U.S. As for whether Trump will really launch ground attacks on Venezuela or change Maduro's regime, I think it's very possible, just a matter of time, unless Maduro leaves. We'll keep watching and report if there's new developments. All right, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. See you next program.